Hello and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. I'm your host for the next hour here, and yes, that means I'm Ellie. Today we're going to be following up on a hypnotic regression transcript that I covered in last week's episode. Now, the regression subject is someone that I've spoken about before. He appears in episode 1 and also episode 3. This is a man by the name of Bledsoe, who had a number of paranormal experiences that are described in the previous episodes, but also in 2012, he was visited by a celestial being. Sometimes he calls her the Lady in White, and sometimes he calls her the Mother, which I think means the mother of all creation in this regression. Now, the regression was conducted or commissioned by NASA in 2018, and it was performed by an esteemed parapsychologist by the name of Barbara Lamb. If you missed those previous episodes, you can always go and catch up later. There's lots of information. During the regression, Chris talked about a prediction that was made by this lady in white, and I want to talk about that today. She predicted, and I quote, that when the red star of Regulus meets the eye of the Sphinx, everything about the origins of humanity and where it's heading next are going to be revealed, and that the world is going to travel through a very difficult period just prior to this event. In fact, I believe that the lady in white said that the circumstances of the difficult event are going to be something that spark an intervention by the lady in white herself and also by other celestial beings. And that it was kind of destined to be this way because the world and humanity has to be given the opportunity to understand the choices that are available to us so that we can collectively make a decision about where we plan to go next or what we plan to do as humanity next. We will have a choice to make as to whether we want to continue to create horrible circumstances for ourselves like we seem to routinely do right now. Things like war and famine and fighting and division, or if we want to ascend to something higher, better, and lighter. I know what I choose, and I haven't even met the lady in white or any of her mates yet. But you never know. Maybe they'll pop in for a visit tomorrow. I don't know. That would be kind of cool. Anyway, well, I don't know. I might run away screaming. I really don't know. Anyway, the lady in white said that the otherworldly beings that act as our guardians of humanity will reveal themselves and share their messages with us on this day of the Regulus Sphinx event. Since then, Bledsoe has repeated this very same prediction numerous times in a variety of different interviews. Many interviews. He's also spoken of something significant happening during Easter of 2026. Maybe it's the same event, maybe it's something different. Now, if you've listened to the first episode of this show, you'll know that Edgar Cayce, the psychic who was born in the late 1800s, also said something very similar to this would happen regarding the Hall of Records. What Edgar Cayce said back in 1933, long before Bledsoe was even born, was that the Hall of Records, which is like a library of information about humanity, would be discovered, and it would contain the secrets of humanity, and that it would all be revealed during a period of terrible misfortune on Earth and suffering of the people. When this kind of crossover or coincidence in messaging occurs, it kind of gets my attention. And that's what I want to look at today. But first, before any of this, the red star of Regulus has to meet the eye of the Sphinx, whatever that means. So let's start right there and look at that statement. Regulus is actually the brightest star in the constellation of Leo. When it's observed from Earth, it isn't red. In fact, it appears to be a blue-white color. Regulus is also not a single star. It's a multi-star group or a multi-star system, and it comprises of 3 stars. One of them is Regulus A, which is the one that we can see as the brightest in the constellation. There's also Regulus B, which has a separation arc from Regulus A of about 176 seconds. And then there's an elusive 3rd star in the group of stars called Regulus AB. I say it's elusive Because scientists know that Regulus AB exists, but they've never directly observed it. It's hidden. And so we don't know much about it. That's kind of intriguing, isn't it? Scientists believe it to be the remnant core of a star that has died or is dying. And what that means is simply that once a star has exhausted its nuclear energy, it begins to die off. So, of course, it should be noted that when a star dies, it's generally a process that takes thousands of years. So, this is an interesting nugget of information because let me tell you what happens when a star begins to run out of fuel or nuclear energy and begins to die. First, it starts to lose hydrogen. This causes it to look for an alternative. It begins playing with helium and carbon and oxygen instead. And guess what happens when it does that? The combination of these elements turns the appearance of the star from white or that bluish white color to red. Now, we aren't sure where in the process of essentially dying this elusive Regulus AB star is because we haven't been able to observe it directly. It's hidden. Okay, but we do know that it's dying. So, okay, we've got the sciencey bit out the way. Well, not exactly. All right. So, to continue slightly, there comes a point in the dying process where the dying star that's turned from white to red, it begins to kind of shed its outer layer. A bit like when we get a sunburn. Our skin turns red and then it begins to peel away. Well, the same thing happens to the dying star. And what's left behind is a white inner core. And so, keeping this process in mind, and because scientists haven't been able to directly observe Regulus AB, there is a possibility that science hasn't quite gotten the timescale of the dying element exactly right. Maybe they have miscalculated slightly by just 1,000 years or so, and maybe what they think is a blue white star that's hidden, it may just be a red star that hasn't fully peeled off that outer red core. So, in the scheme of galactic life cycles, 1,000 years isn't very much. And I think that science, I think we all know that science has had to backtrack from time to time because it has gotten some things wrong. And so maybe Regulus AB is still red. Maybe its process of dying has been just slightly miscalculated by scientists. I don't think they'd like to admit that, but you never know. Now, there's something else that's interesting about the Regulus star system. It sits in close proximity with a variety of other stars that collectively form the shape of a lion's head in the constellation of Leo. Ancient astrologers actually associated Regulus with royalty and also leadership because of its positioning inside the Leo constellation. Royalty and leadership sounds a little bit like those guardians of humanity, doesn't it? Do you think they might seem a bit royal to us if they suddenly showed up, these guardians of humanity, and if they were shimmering and tall and hovered 6 feet above the ground and gloriously kind of were beautiful and just exquisite looking and had this wonderful choir-like sound to them? After all, the way that Chris Bledsoe described them and that intriguing comment that he made during his regression about how our creators, those celestial beings that visit him from time to time, along with the lady in white, they tended to us as though we were being raised or cultivated in a terrarium. Now, those were Chris's exact words. And I guess to galactic royalty, it might seem as though humanity is quaint like a pet or a potted plant or something. And I'm not trying to say this in a nasty way. The truth is that if there are, and I believe there may be, celestial beings of that nature, then they might very well consider us to be something that they tend to in a terrarium. And that would be quite a natural response from an entity that is so much more superior than we are. It kind of reminds me of what I used to believe when I was a youngster. And I just knew this in my bones. I don't know where I got the belief from, but I used to believe that Earth was a petri dish and that we were a science experiment being conducted by aliens. And when I asked myself, did I ever actually stop believing this? I'm not sure. I don't know. I really don't know. I may have stopped thinking about it, but I'm not sure that I ever stopped believing it. I can't be sure. I included it in my bio here at KGRA just to cover my bases, just in case. Anywho, so when the red star of Regulus meets the eye of the Sphinx, that's the thing. And Regulus is associated with royalty and leadership. And the prediction is that our guardians of humanity will reveal themselves, and all the secrets of our existence will also be revealed on that day. You know, it sounds really mystical and very important, very exciting, and maybe a little bit unlikely. Perhaps it is unlikely, I don't know. But you know, this Regulus alignment has actually been happening around once a year for some time now. And what I'm talking about is the Regulus alignment with the Sphinx. The Regulus alignment with the Sphinx. It happens pretty much every year. Yes, at various different times and various different days. And what it means in mundane terms is that the travel path of the group of stars that are called Regulus includes a time when Regulus rises due east in Giza in Egypt. The placement and directional positioning of the giant Sphinx in Giza means that the Sphinx is pointing due east. So any planet or star that rises due east will directly align with the eye of the Sphinx, and that includes Regulus. So the last time this happened wasn't really that long ago. It was actually February 14th of this year, 2024. And the next predicted time that it's going to happen is on April 24th, 2026. And as it happens, that date is just 4 days after Easter. Chris Bledsoe said that something important would happen at Easter 2026. So I'm going to keep this date in mind as a possibility because we're going to look at this. And then it happens again in October 2026 on the 7th of October at 5:30 a.m. There are also other dates in 2027, 28, 29, and 30, but we have plenty of time to revisit those dates if we need to. For now, let's stick to a possible day and time that matches some of the most profound aspects of the galaxy, and also keeping in mind what Chris Bledsoe has told us that the Lady of White specifically predicted. She predicted 2026. So we're going to focus on 2026 because that's the year most relevant to everything that Chris Bledsoe's Lady in White has predicted. So we have two possible Regulus dates to look at for 2026. There's April 24th, 2026 at 8 a.m. because Regulus rises due east directly in alignment with the Sphinx on that day. It also happens again on October 7th, 2026 at 5:30 a.m. in exactly the same way. But one of those days really stands out because when you're like me and you're going through a weird obsession with astrology, which is what I'm going through right now, you just can't help yourself but want to look deeper. And I looked deeper and I found something. I want to share it with you. So let's look deeper. There is a very notable and quite unique thing happening in 2026 regarding the planetary lineup. It's the kind of rare occurrence that gets astrologers very excited. And that's when something that never happens in your lifetime suddenly happens in your lifetime. So let me explain. The solar system is broken up into inner and outer planets. The inner planets include Mars, Venus, Mercury. Okay, there's also the sun and the moon. There are 5 outer planets. These are Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Very important. The reason why they're called outer planets is because they have a very wide planetary cycle. For example, if the Earth was sitting at the center of everything, which is where astrologers hypothetically position it in order to analyze their charts, then the moon takes around a month to travel around the Earth. The sun takes around a year to travel around the Earth or to do a complete orbit. But Jupiter, which is one of the outer planets, takes 12 years to do an orbit around the Earth. And Saturn takes 29 years. And Uranus takes 84 years. Neptune takes 164 years. And Pluto takes a whopping 248 years to complete one orbit around the Earth. So imagine how special a day it must be when each of these outer planets are all doing something the same as each other at a moment in time. It hardly ever happens. And for the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps even ever, it's happening in 2026. And it's happening on October the 7th, 2026 at 5:30 a.m., precisely when the Regulus star is rising due east and it meets the eye of the Sphinx. And I'm getting a chill. So today we're going to look at that day from an astrological perspective. Get comfortable. We're going to go deep. I mean, when I say deep, I mean deep. And don't worry, you're not going to need to be an astrology expert to understand today's episode. I'm going to keep it simple, but hopefully clear enough for you to see why I'm kind of excited about this and why I've taken a real interest in Chris Bledsoe's experiences. So here we go. Ready? All right. The 12 signs of the zodiac are divided into masculine and feminine signs. The 6 feminine signs include Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, and Pisces. The 6 masculine signs are Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius. Over the past few years, many of the planets in our solar system have been moving into and staying longer in masculine signs. If you were to think about it as though you were watching a movie, it would be getting a little dramatic right now. A little bit like a gang of boys is lining up ready to take on the gang of girls. Now, the reason why I describe it like that is because Chris Bledsoe's Lady in White also referred to a kind of battle between the divine masculine and the divine feminine, a battle for control, a battle between the boys and the girls. And that's what the planetary lineup looks like. It kind of looks like it's getting ready to do that. And weirdly enough, for the past 2,000 years, humanity has been living in the feminine age of Pisces, which is kind of weird because conversely, that translates into an age during which the divine masculine has been dominant. So things like strong male tendencies have prevailed in society. Order, strength, governance, patriarchal systems of religion, business, family, and also things like material comfort, security, safety, power, and, of course, war. All you have to do in order to understand how the masculine divine works is to look at the Bible. It's been around for the 2,000 years that the age of Pisces has been around. And so it's been around and it's been dictating the way of life during the past 2,000 years, during this age of Pisces that we live in. Now, the Bible is a compilation of writings about civilizations of men in which women existed, sure, but they rarely were mentioned by name. And even if they were just generally someone's daughter or someone's wife or someone's slave to be bought and sold to another man. The Bible is an excellent example, really uncanny example of this age of divine masculine, in which the traditional or stereotyped depiction of masculinity is evidenced in how humanity exists and how life is operated. And just as you'd imagine to compensate, the age of Pisces, which is a feminine sign, was given an honourable mention over the past 2,000 years, a little bit like women were given an honourable mention in the Bible. It reminds me of some of the government programs that I used to work on, in which the leadership would make a point of naming the project the independent review of something or other. And those of us who worked on those reviews would know immediately that if the title of what we were doing was called Independent, then we could expect that it would be anything other than independent. The feminine age of Pisces, being ruled by the masculine divine, sounds just like the kind of work I've always done throughout my life. So, getting to know me one little tidbit at a time. So, what's about to happen in 2026 is that those outer planets are all going to begin to enter the masculine signs. That's the masculine signs of the zodiac. And the thing about these outer planets is that they are considered by astrologers to be planets that have a profound and long lasting impact on humanity as a whole. When those outer planets show up, it really means something on a broader scale. The inner planets like Mars and Mercury and Venus, they tend to impact our daily lives. But the outer planets, that's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, well, their influence is of a much wider scale, and it can mark major changes for societies, nations, and maybe even humanity as a whole. They have a much bigger and a more significant imprint on us collectively. And so, for the first time, just as the star of Regulus is rising in the east, directly aligned with the Sphinx, on October the 7th, 2026 at 5:30 a.m. This is what the outer planets that are transiting in masculine signs will be doing, and this is the impact each of those planets will represent to humanity. Let's look at them one by one. We have 5, okay? Remember, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Let's begin with Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is known as the lawgiver in astrology. It represents societal trends and cultural shifts. It motivates things like expansion, growth, and abundance. It relates to politics, nations, and the rise and fall of civilizations. On the 30th of June 2026, Jupiter will enter the masculine sign of Leo. It will be transiting Leo in the 11th house when Regulus meets the Sphinx. The 11th house in astrology looks like a slice of pie on an astrology chart. Each pie slice is numbered 1 through 12, and each slice has its own significance. The 11th house influences things like mob psychology. What do large congregations of people do when they're together? It can also represent things like rebellion, idealistic aspirations, optimism. So, what Jupiter in the 11th house might be saying is that society as a whole, as a mob, is experiencing a groundswell of rebellion that might even lead to a massive cultural shift. Nations might be defeated in wars with significant implications for other nations or types of nations. It might even be that a nation of voters have elected new leadership that will completely change everything forever. Often, Jupiter can represent growth and expansion and massive political shifts, but the fact that it appears in the 11th house means that it would probably be driven from the bottom up, from the people, rather than from the top down. It would be unreasonable to think of something like a revolution or a civil war or something like that. The other thing that might apply here is that Jupiter also relates to things like religion, financial institutions, and law and order. So it looks as though this day might be one in which there is a major shift in perspective about what to believe, what's real, what governs us, what the rules should be, or who should be in charge. Now, Jupiter transiting Leo also holds significance because Leo has a tendency to align with natural leadership. So, if there was a revolution or something like that occurring at the time, then it's possible that the people have been inspired to rebel because they're following a charismatic personality into that rebellion. Or they might be following a set of principles that inspire them collectively. The news about Jupiter transiting Leo in the 11th house is that it also means the people are likely to be getting smarter. The influence of intellectual growth is quite strong in this astrological scenario. So that's Jupiter. Next, let's look at Saturn, what Saturn is doing. Saturn in astrology is known as the timekeeper, and it relates to generational scales. It symbolizes things like structure, responsibility, and limitations. When Saturn appears, it tends to relate to long term society changes, including tradition, authority, and institutional structures. On the 14th of February 2026, Saturn is going to enter the masculine sign of Aries. It will be retrograde in Aries in the 7th house when Regulus meets the Sphinx. So, just to help you understand the importance of this, I want to explain that when a planet is retrograde, it looks from Earth as though it's traveling backwards. That means that it transits and then it reverses and then it transits again. So, to help you to understand the importance of retrograde, particularly when it comes to an outer planet, think of the planet as being a car. So, that car has just run over something. It stops and then it reverses and runs over it again. And then it moves forward and it runs over again. That car has really made its mark on whatever it was that it ran over, hasn't it? Well, it's the same when a planet goes retrograde. In astrology. So imagine the impact of an outer planet that has the potential to massively influence humanity. Now, when the astrologer is looking at an event, Saturn can relate to things like public service, landlords, law enforcement, and that's okay. But I'm not sure how relevant it might be to the kind of event the lady in white is referring to. What I do find probably quite relevant, though, about Saturn is that it also chronicles things like epidemics, wide scale tragedies, wide scale public sadness and mourning, and maybe even famine or resource shortages. It kind of reminds me of the sorts of feelings that we would get not that long ago when we watched huge numbers of fatalities arising out of COVID, particularly in places like Italy or in New York City, where the morgues were filling up so fast that they had to start storing bodies in refrigerated trucks or vans instead. And also, the toilet paper shortage and all of the other shortages and the infighting and just feeling as though we're just not sure what's going to happen next. Now, because Saturn is in the 7th house and also because of its retrograde movement, you're learning today, aren't you? There seems to be an indication of widespread loss of life, maybe related to war or illness. And this might be the reason behind what we can see in Jupiter's position that highlights the possibility of rebellion. Also, with Saturn positioned in the sign of Aries, well, Aries is a really fiery sign. And so the expression by many people of passion and outrage is possible. Maybe something has occurred by that time that is so tragic and badly managed by world's leaders that the common man begins to say, you know what? We've had enough. We've had it, and we're not going to stand for it any longer. It feels a little bit like that. And because this is happening in the 7th house, it might not relate to the people's own country. It might be with regards to events of cruelty, neglect, or mass tragedy in a foreign country. And the widespread outrage is being expressed or even acted upon all over the world. So that's 2 planets done. Let's have a look at a 3rd planet. Let's look at the planet of Uranus. Now, Uranus is sometimes called the cosmic disruptor. It fosters originality, innovation, and rebellion. There's that word rebellion again. There's a theme emerging here, and that's the theme of rebellion. Anyway, Uranus is a planet that influences things like collective thinking, revolution, technological advancement, and shifts in consciousness. On the 26th of April, 2026, Uranus will enter the masculine sign of Gemini. Now, remember that Uranus influences revolution, the collective, and it can spark rebellion against authority because it challenges norms and encourages progress and new ways of doing things. It's also going to be entering Gemini 6 days after Easter, which is 6 days after the time that Chris Bledsoe specifically references. In fact, Chris wasn't really specific about what was going to happen during Easter 2026, but he has stated numerous times that something quite bad might be in play. So it might be a good idea for us to keep this approximate time of the year, that period of Easter 2026, close to us. I'll circle back in future episodes down the line to see if we can unpick the astrological messages even more. However, for completeness sake today, I will say that when Regulus meets the Sphinx, Uranus will be retrograde in Gemini in the 9th house. Uranus is sometimes referred to as the black sheep of the herd. It represents the friction between political forces, and when it appears, it tends to indicate that individuals are breaking free from their shackles. Uranus often relates to riots, strikes, and chaos. Now, remember what I said about what happens when a planet goes retrograde. It's like the car that just keeps backing over its victim again and again until it's really left its mark. In the 9th house, which is where Uranus will be retrograde, well, the 9th house is about spirituality, philosophy, and higher education. It's about thinking outside the box, broadening intellectual horizons, and seeking truths that may be well outside the normal understanding of life. And because Uranus is with the sign of Gemini, this means that people will be curious, looking at or learning about something extraordinary and so different to any concept of reality, but they aren't afraid. I mean, maybe some will be afraid, but the thing about Gemini in this scenario is that it signifies an open mindedness about what's being presented. Now, before I forget, I need to also let you know that the 9th house can also relate to religion and churches and science and the way in which these things influence the people. I know that Uranus has a funny name, but today it's a very exciting planet because what this scenario tells me with Uranus retrograde in Gemini in the 9th house is that the people will have been very angry, rising up to demand the end of something that's been very upsetting that is occurring in the world. And then after a prolonged period of rebellion, which may have been sparked by whatever it is that Chris Bledsoe seemed to hint was going to happen around Easter of 2026, something else happens that is so outside the scope of our understanding of reality and of life and of faith and of purpose and pretty much everything else that we can hardly believe our eyes. But we aren't afraid. And most of us will simply be curious or perhaps willing to learn more or to grow from the experience. That's pretty extraordinary. Can you see why I'm a little obsessed with things like tarot and astrology? With the partnership of science and ancient wisdom, and of course, this tarot and astrology all mixed in, there is so much to learn and experience when you open your mind up enough to embrace some of the more mystical and esoteric tools that are available. Anywho, I am definitely a fan. So we've done those planets. The next one, the fourth one on the list, is Neptune. Neptune is a mystical, spiritual, and sometimes confusing planet of illusion, dreams, and deception. It fosters artistry, culture, and idealism. It can be a very uplifting influence, but it can also be a little unnerving because it often represents things that remain unknown or which kind of seem unreal, even. Okay, so let's call Neptune the slippery character. That's just my terminology, right? The slippery character planet that leaves us wondering. So, where will Neptune be on the 7th of October at 5:30? Well, we do know that Neptune's going to be entering the masculine sign of Aries on the 26th of January 2026. It will be retrograde in Aries in the 7th house and will be in conjunction with Saturn when Regulus meets the Sphinx. So, what I mean by conjunction is that Saturn and Neptune will be closely grouped together. That kind of means that they will be joining forces. It makes the likelihood and the outcome and the power of the imprint much, much stronger. Much stronger. And they're both retrograde and much stronger. So think about everything that we've talked about with regards to Saturn. Saturn is the planet of structure, responsibility, and security, and knowing your limitations. And of course, both Neptune and Saturn will be retrograde. So this will be an important, heavy imprint on the people, on humanity. I think that with everything else that we're seeing occur at this time, the significance of the Neptune-Saturn retrograde conjunction is exactly as the lady in white described it to Chris Bledsoe. She told him that humanity will be given a choice about how they wish to continue to live. They, us, we. Do we want to live in an existence that is full of war and destruction, death, failure, poverty, cruelty, neglect? Neglect for the planet, for ourselves, and for each other, and this hatred and division? Or do we want to jump into the unknown and embrace the idealism of a spiritual existence, a higher plane of consciousness? And I think that this planetary aspect of the time shows that while many of the people are uncertain, they might be apprehensive and even bewildered by the event, there's also a deep understanding of the importance of the moment. And the decision will really make its mark, perhaps for the next hundreds of years, or perhaps even for the next thousands of years. So we only have one more outer planet to talk about. And the last of the outer planets, but certainly not the least, is Pluto. Pluto is considered by astrologers to be the transformer planet. It creates deep transformational change. It takes nearly 250 years. It takes actually 248 years to arrive anywhere. And so when it does, it tends to bring with it things like death, rebirth, and regeneration. Pluto's cycles have coincided with major historical shifts and profound change and transformation. Pluto brings things that were once hidden up to the surface so that they can be examined, so they can't be ignored. They must be acknowledged and examined and opened up for everyone to see. Pluto is very confrontational. Suddenly our shadows become light and truths that were hidden can no longer be avoided. Now, Pluto is the very last outer planet to enter a masculine sign in 2026. It will be retrograde. Now, remember that retrograde in Aquarius. It'll be in Aquarius in the 5th house when Regulus meets the eye of the Sphinx. It's getting exciting, huh? The arrival of Pluto suddenly after 248 years of floating around all over the place, and then of all places to arrive in the middle of this madness in Aquarius, doesn't look like an accident to me. The consequence of Pluto in the 5th house, particularly because it's retrograde, is like a cherry on top of this whole moment. There is an artistic, spiritual, airy, and transformational observation of how things work on the inside of a person. There's a conscious shift with Pluto, perhaps not for everyone, but certainly for most people. There's a playfulness and a new adventure arising from the collective jump into the unknown. I actually even remember how I was feeling as I was writing this part of my script that I'm talking to you with today. I was thinking about all of the transformation, the possibilities of what this might be. And my eyes just started to well up a little. And I got chills that felt really familiar. I often get these chills, and I've actually got one now. When I get them when I hit the nail on the head as I'm reading tarot. Now, no matter where Pluto appears in an astrological birth chart, it will be associated with transformation, regeneration, and that's true when the process is easy. But it's also true when the process of transformation is very painful and difficult and very hard to proceed forward with. I think that what it might represent in this moment here, according to the astrological data that I've been able to compile, is that humanity will be tired, really tired of living the way we have been, fed up and tired, fed up and tired and angry at the things we can't seem to fix that cause pain everywhere we look. I think that somewhere in the vicinity of April 26th, 2026, there will be an event that cuts directly into our hearts, and it will spark a worldwide assault on the status quo. And I think that by October 7th, 2026, the attack on the status quo will have been raging for 6 months. Until, unexpectedly, well, unless you've been tuning into this show, of course, humanity will be presented with a profound moment, a direct contact event involving visitation and possibly even intervention by something or someone that presents us humans with a choice. It's going to be a red pill versus a blue pill moment. And I have a feeling we might choose the red pill, which means that everything as we know it will then begin to change. I doubt very much that things will snap into something new instantaneously or even overnight. There will be a process of change that might take years, perhaps even decades. But I think it will spark the end of the status quo. And it will also mark the shift from the divine masculine, with all of the outer planets lining up to sing a chorus of kind of, goodbyes to the ways of the old and to celebrate the ways of the new. And from that point on, we will be positioned in the masculine age of Aquarius, but with the divine feminine energies in charge of our existence for quite a time to come. So each age is estimated to last 2,150 years. And if the age of Pisces started in, 1 AD, then it's estimated that the age of Aquarius would begin at 2000 in the year 2150. However, we don't know whether there's a lead up to that or whether it's a little bit off. Just because our calendar begins on the 1st doesn't mean that we got it exactly right. And so the year 2026 might be close enough, or it could be a 100-year warning allowing us to make the changes that we need. I guess we'll find out. It's coming very soon, and so I guess we will. Whenever it does occur, the age of Aquarius will be an age of collaboration, inward focus, shaking off limitations of religion and structured ways of thinking. Instead, there'll be a heightened sense of awareness and enlightenment, and will be developing and evolving, and people will gradually begin to feel lighter, both physically and emotionally. Political leadership will be toppled and replaced with natural laws of governance that foster greater and more uninhibited states of spirituality and consciousness. And there's likely to be a wider acceptance of and dissemination of truth. And of course, before we end today's episode, I should probably tell you where the sun and the moon are going to be positioned on this day, the 7th of October, 2026 at 5:30 a.m. The sun is going to be in the masculine sign of Libra in the first house. It will be ascendant. The sun in Libra represents profound beauty in much the same way that Chris describes the lady in white. Also represents captivating charm, elegance, and self-identity. A little bit like self-love. Any planet appearing in the first house is speaking of strength of identity, a little like someone who finally understands where they came from, or why they're here. The sun is also about the force of a nation or a people or the people, and means that whatever is happening is probably happening to everyone, everywhere, all at once. Everyone who wants to be a part of it will be ascendant. Some people won't want to be, and I'll be talking about what might happen to people who are left behind in a later episode. But for now, we're talking about the rest of us. And it looks like we will be moving forward and not backwards as a result of this event. And then finally, let's look at the moon and where that's going to be positioned in that moment. The moon will be in the 12th house, in the sign of Leo. Now, remember that constellation of Leo that I referred to at the beginning of this episode? The constellation of royalty, and the moon representing the female energy of the divine feminine, and the 12th house relating to the unveiling of truths that were once hidden from view. This is an extraordinary chart for an extraordinary day. So let's summarize this whole thing so that you can clearly see the significance of the moment. We're looking at October the 7th, 2026 at 5:30 a.m. when the star of Regulus meets the eye of the Sphinx. Firstly, all of the outer planets will be lining up along with the sun and the moon in such a way that evidences a profound statement of the masculine, a lineup that really has never happened like this before. Collectively, their placement, whether it's in transit or retrograde, whether it's conjuncted or not, and taking into account the zodiac sign they have entered or which house they happen to be in at the time, all of this tells a story to us. And this story appears to be that at an earlier time, perhaps even around Easter of 2026, as predicted by the Lady in White, an event is going to take place that gets the attention of the entire world. It's not a good event. It's a deeply tragic and disturbing event. Many people will be watching it unfold from overseas, but the ordinary man and woman will experience a growing sense of anger and outrage until finally the dam is broken and riots start in the street. The status quo is challenged, seriously challenged. There may be civil unrest in multiple countries, or there may be a massive breakout of war, or there may be an upheaval of a nation entirely, the fall of a nation, the defeat of a nation by a cruel adversary. Alternatively, it may be an epidemic or a mass casualty or some other kind of huge and disturbing tragedy. But it breeds outrage and rebellion, and not just in one country. The rebellion itself becomes a pandemic. Now, if I rely on Chris Bledsoe's Lady in White, then the catalyst will have occurred in around April 2026, around Easter time. But the rebellion will continue until October. It might even intensify because whatever it is that occurs appears to spark an intervening event on around October 7th, when Regulus rises due east in Giza, Egypt, and meets the eye of the Sphinx. The final planet to join the chorus of masculine zodiac alignment will be Pluto, which will mark the coming of something utterly transformative for mankind. There is a deeply beautiful, powerful, and charismatic element that stands in the moonlight, revealing truths that were previously hidden from view. The revelation that this brings will be a change maker for humanity. Some of us will be confused and bewildered, frightened perhaps, or at least apprehensive. We might be afraid, but the majority of us will be ready for a new reality. If you were to just ask me, if I was to boil it down to just a simple thing, I would say that it looks like a major contact event, but not in the way that seems like a group of aliens in space gear coming out of a spaceship. It looks more like a powerful feminine force staring down a powerful masculine force and asking humanity to stand beside her so that together we can change everything forever. I've had chills throughout this episode. Humanity will be presented with a choice. We can choose to stick with what we've already got and gradually destroy ourselves with endless conflicts, petty fights over material things, and brutish tactics of control and inequality. Or we can follow the light, the mystery of something new, and shift ourselves into a higher level of consciousness. In one hand, we're offered a red pill. In the other, we're offered a blue pill. And it's time to choose. And because of that influence of Pluto, fingers crossed, it does indeed look as though we might choose the red pill, the pill of adventure, uncertainty, and mass personal transformation. It's only day one on October 7th, 2026, so we may not evolve overnight. But I think the day marks a profound, recognizable moment in time. So I have to tell you now that I've circled October the 7th, 2026 in my calendar. Here in Australia, it's going to be 2:30 in the afternoon, October the 7th, 2026. It's an extraordinary astrological chart, and I'm honoured to be the first person to present it as an idea of what might be coming for us in the future, our future. This could be the moment of our future. I can't promise you that it will definitely happen this way, but I will say that the planets and the stars are in perfect alignment at that time. They're in perfect alignment at 5:30 a.m. on the 7th of October 2026 in Giza. Everything fits perfectly. So perhaps, just like I have, you might decide to circle this date in your calendar as well. In the meantime, let's move on to other topics that might be helpful to us as we approach the future. As I put the topic of Chris Bledsoe to the side for a little while, I do wonder what he would say if he heard this episode. And I also wonder what Edgar Casey would say if he heard this episode, because it also appears to fit with his prediction of a similar event nearly 100 years ago. And I wonder what Plato would say, because he was the one to first realize it was possible for this to occur at all. Or maybe he was one of the first. Anyway, he's the first one I'm aware of. And I wonder how other astrologers will interpret the planetary events of this day. Remember, October the 7th, 2026 at 5:30 a.m. I would love to hear from other astrologers to see what they have to say. I look forward to seeing other interpretations as we move forward in time and get closer and closer to the day. In the meantime, I'm going to start looking at other things and every now and then circle back. So if you'd like to delve a little deeper into the spiritual side of what I do, then check out my YouTube channel. It's called Ellie Dreams Down Under. There's discussion, tarot, astrology, and I look at all kinds of people, circumstances, and topics. A new video is aired every day, and sometimes when I'm feeling really energetic, there might even be two. Oh, and I've also decided to pop up on Facebook these days. In fact, you can now find me on Facebook, Threads, Instagram, Patreon, and Shopify. Just Google Ellie Dreams Down Under or visit me on YouTube and you'll find all my social media links there. And finally, thank you to everyone who's joined me today on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms, Facebook, X, Rumble, and pretty much every podcast forum. But the best place to hang out with like-minded watchers, experiencers, spiritualists, and weirdos of the best variety, like me, is at KGRA. Just click on live.kgradb.com and use promo code Ellie for 30% off your subscription. So that's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.